It was a bright morning at the Alpine Crest Ski Resort, the kind of day that lured skiers and snowboarders out of their beds and onto the slopes. The sun glinted off the fresh powder, creating a sparkling blanket over the mountains. I had always loved this place. It was where I had spent countless weekends with my wife, Sarah, carving our way down the slopes, laughing over hot chocolate at the lodge and sharing dreams of the future. But that morning, everything changed. I remember walking into the lodge, the scent of coffee and cinnamon wafting through the air. I was looking forward to a day of skiing, but first I wanted to surprise Sarah with breakfast. As I made my way to the cafe counter, I noticed her sitting at a table by the window. My heart skipped a beat. She looked beautiful, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. But as I approached, I saw him, Jake, the ski instructor, sitting across from her, leaning in too close, his hand brushing against hers. The world around me faded away. The laughter of children, the chatter of friends, and the clinking of cups all became distant echoes. I felt a tight, not form in my stomach. It was as if someone had punched me in the gut. I stood frozen, watching them share a moment that was meant to be ours. The way she laughed at something he said, the way her eyes sparkled with mischief, it was all too much. My mind raced with disbelief. Was my wife really cheating on me? I turned on my heel and stepped outside, the cold air hitting me like a splash of ice water. I needed to think. How could this happen? How could she betray me like this? We had built a life together, a life filled with love and trust. I had always believed we were happy. The thought of her with him twisted my heart. I felt anger bubbling within me, mixing with an overwhelming sense of betrayal. As I stood at the edge of the slopes, I couldn't shake the image of her laughing with him, the ski instructor who had stolen not just her heart but my trust. I had to act, not just for myself, but for the integrity of the place we once cherished together. My heart raced as I realized I had a decision to make. I could confront her now, or I could gather my thoughts and plan my next move. I chose the latter. The anger surged through me, but I needed to channel it into something productive. I had to know more about this Jake, this interloper in my life. Who was he? What did he want with my wife? I could feel my resolve hardening. I would not let this go unanswered. The rest of the day felt like a blur. I skied alone, my mind racing with thoughts of Sarah and Jake. I watched the other couples laughing and enjoying the slopes, and I felt an ache in my chest. I needed to gather evidence to understand the depth of this betrayal. The thought of exposing Jake and making him pay for his part in this twisted affair became my new obsession. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the snow, I returned to the lodge, still reeling from what I had seen. I knew I had to confront Sarah eventually, but for now I had a different plan, one that involved digging deeper into the life of the man who had taken my wife from me, even if only for a moment. In the coming days, I would become a man on a mission. The next morning, I woke up with a singular purpose. The image of Sarah and Jake together haunted me, fueling my desire for revenge. I knew I had to learn everything I could about this ski instructor who had crossed the line. I had no idea how deep this betrayal went, but I was determined to find out. I started my investigation at the ski resort itself. The Alpine Crest was a tight-knit community where everyone seemed to know everyone else. I figured if I could find some dirt on Jake, it might be enough to expose him and put an end to this affair. I arrived early, the sun barely peeking over the mountains as I walked into the lodge. The air was crisp, and the smell of fresh coffee filled my nostrils. I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I was stepping into enemy territory. I approached the front desk, feigning casual interest in the ski school. "Hey, can you tell me about the instructors here?" I asked the receptionist, trying to sound nonchalant. She smiled brightly, clearly used to chatting with guests. "Sure, we have a great team. Jake is one of our best. He's been here for a few seasons now, very popular with the guests." "Popular, huh?" I replied, trying to mask my bitterness. "What makes him so special?" "Oh, he's just so charismatic, great with the kids, and he really knows how to get people to enjoy their time on the slopes." She paused, then added, "He has a way of making everyone feel like they're the center of attention." That was enough to set my teeth on edge. I could just imagine Jake charming Sarah with his smooth talk and winning smile. I needed to dig deeper. I asked the receptionist if there were any upcoming events or gatherings where I might run into the instructors. She mentioned a ski instructor meeting later that evening, which would be open to all staff. I decided I would attend. I needed to see Jake in action, observe how he interacted with others, and gather any information I could. As the day wore on, I felt a sense of urgency building within me. I wanted to confront Jake to see the man who had encroached on my life, but I needed to be smart about it. I couldn't just rush in blind. I had to gather intelligence first. Later that evening, I returned to the lodge, blending in with the nightly crowd. The meeting was held in a small conference room off to the side. I slipped in quietly, taking a seat at the back. The room was filled with instructors chatting and laughing, but my focus was solely on Jake. He walked in a few minutes later, exuding confidence. His tousled hair and laid-back demeanor drew the attention of everyone in the room. As he began to speak, I felt a wave of anger wash over me. He was charismatic, charming, and utterly infuriating. I listened as he talked about the upcoming ski season, his plans for teaching, and how he wanted to improve guest experiences. It was clear he was passionate about his job, but that only made my blood boil more. I needed to find a way to gather more information. After the meeting adjourned, I hung back, pretending to be engrossed in my phone. I overheard snippets of conversations, laughter, and camaraderie. It was a world I had once been part of with Sarah, and the memories stung. I watched as Jake mingled, effortlessly engaging with his colleagues and even guests. He was like a magnet drawing people in. As the night wore on, I decided it was time to make my move. I approached one of the instructors, a woman named Lisa who seemed approachable. "Hey, do you know Jake well?" I asked casually, trying to sound innocent. "Oh, Jake? Yeah, he's a great guy," she replied, her eyes lighting up. "He really knows how to teach skiing. You know, he can be a bit of a flirt." "Flirt?" I echoed, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yeah, he's always charming the guests, but it's harmless mostly, just part of the job, I guess." She paused, then added, "But I've heard rumors about him. Some say he's had a few flings with guests, but nothing too serious." My heart raced as I absorbed her words. Flings. I felt a mix of anger and satisfaction. This was the dirt I needed. If he had a reputation, it would only help my cause. I pressed Lisa for more details, but she did have much else to offer. Still, I felt like I was on the right path. As I left the lodge that night, I realized I was no longer just a heartbroken husband. I was a man with a mission. I would expose Jake and put an end to his charm offensive. The more I learned about him, the more determined I became to make him pay for his betrayal. The days dragged on, each one filled with a growing sense of urgency and frustration. My investigation into Jake had revealed enough to fuel my anger, but I still hadn't confronted Sarah. I knew I had to face her, but the thought of that conversation left me feeling hollow. I kept replaying the scene of her laughing with him in the lodge. Each time it cut deeper. Finally, after a week of gathering information and watching Jake from a distance, I couldn't put it off any longer. I needed answers. I needed to confront Sarah about the affair, and I needed to do it before I took any further action against Jake. It was time to lay everything on the table. I chose a quiet evening, hoping the calm atmosphere might make the conversation a little easier. I prepared myself for the confrontation. I wanted to be firm but not explosive. I wanted her to understand the depth of my pain without turning the discussion into a shouting match. But as I sat at the kitchen table waiting for her to come home, my heart raced with anxiety. When Sarah walked through the door, she seemed cheerful, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice bright, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. "Sit down, Sarah," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. The cheerfulness faded from her face as she took a seat across from me. "What's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowing with concern. "I saw you with Jake at the lodge," I said, my voice steady but laced with emotion. "You were laughing with him, and it looked like more than just a friendly conversation." Her face paled. "What? That's ridiculous. We were just talking," she protested, but I could see the guilt flicker in her eyes. "Just talking. You were sitting close, sharing secrets. It didn't look innocent to me." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "Tell me the truth, Sarah. Are you having an affair with him? For a moment, silence hung between us like a heavy fog. I could see her mind racing, searching for the right words. "No, I'm not. It's not what you think." She finally burst out, her voice rising in pitch. "Then what is it? Because it sure looked like more than just a conversation to me. I want to know what's really going on. Did you sleep with him?" Her face turned a shade of crimson and I could see the tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't sleep with him," she said, her voice trembling. "But we've been getting close. He's charming and I guess I got caught up in it." Caught up in it. The phrase echoed in my mind like a taunt. Caught up in it. I repeated, incredulous. "You're married, Sarah. How could you let yourself get close to him like that?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean for it to happen. It was just harmless flirting at first, but then it became more. I didn't know how to stop it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harmless flirting." The words felt like a slap in the face. "You don't think that's a betrayal? How can you say that? You've hurt me, Sarah." I felt a surge of anger mixed with heartbreak. "You've betrayed our vows, our trust." I know," she cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I messed up and I'm so sorry, but it didn't mean anything. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, my voice rising again. "You think this is just a mistake? You think that I can just forget what I saw, that I can unsee the two of you together? You've been lying to me." "I never meant to hurt you," she pleaded, reaching across the table to grasp my hand. "I love you, please just give me a chance to fix this." I pulled my hand away, feeling the coldness of her betrayal wash over me. "How can I trust you again? You let this happen and now I'm supposed to believe that you love me. It feels like you've chosen him over me." "I haven't chosen anyone," she insisted, desperation in her voice. I was confused. "I don't want to lose you. Please, let's work through this together." Her words felt hollow. I wanted to believe her, but the image of her with Jake was burned into my mind. "What about him? What are you going to do about Jake?" I asked, my voice laced with bitterness. "I'll end it, I promise," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll talk to him. I'll make it clear that it's over." "Talking won't be enough," I said, my resolve hardening. "You need to understand that I can't just sit back and let this slide. I'm going to take action." "What do you mean?" she asked, confusion and fear creeping into her expression. "I'm going to make sure Jake pays for what he's done," I said, my voice steady. "He's taken something from me and he needs to be held accountable." "Don't do anything rash," she pleaded, panic rising in her voice. "Please, let's just talk about this." But I was done talking. I could feel the weight of betrayal settling in my chest, and I knew I needed to take control. I would expose Jake for what he truly was. I had to protect what was left of my marriage, even if it meant tearing apart the very fabric of the life we had built. As I stood up to leave the table, I felt a mixture of anger and clarity. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my dignity. I would make sure that Jake would never be able to charm another woman the way he had charmed my wife. After my confrontation with Sarah, I felt a sense of determination that propelled me forward. I had committed to exposing Jake, the ski instructor who had intruded upon my life and my marriage. But before I could take action, I needed to understand him better. I needed to know what drove him, what made him tick, and how he fit into the culture of the ski resort. I spent the next few days gathering information about Jake, trying to piece together the puzzle of his life. I learned that he was a local, having grown up in the nearby town. He had been skiing since he was a child and had developed a reputation as one of the best instructors at the resort. His charm and charisma were legendary, and he was known for being able to connect with guests, especially women. I found myself talking to more instructors and staff at the lodge, trying to gather insights into Jake's character. Most people painted him as a fun-loving guy who just wanted everyone to have a good time on the slopes. But there were whispers of his flings with guests, stories that hinted at a pattern of behavior that made my skin crawl. One evening, I met up with Lisa, the instructor I had spoken to previously. I asked her directly about Jake's reputation. "Is he really as charming as everyone says?" I inquired, trying to sound casual. Lisa chuckled lightly. "Oh, he's definitely charming, but there's a darker side to him too. He's had a few run-ins with guests who didn't take his flirting well. Some women have complained about him getting too close, crossing boundaries." My heart raced at her words. This wasn't just a one-time mistake. Jake had a history of being inappropriate. "So, he's done this before." I pressed, needing to know more. Yeah, but it's always brushed off. He's so good at his job that the resort tends to overlook it. They don't want to tarnish their image by getting rid of someone who brings in so many guests, she explained. It's frustrating, honestly. Some of us have tried to report him, but nothing ever comes of it. The wheels in my mind began to turn. If Jake had a pattern of behavior that the resort was ignoring, maybe I could use that to my advantage. I needed to dig deeper into his past, find something concrete that would force the resort to take action. I spent hours online, searching for any complaints or incidents involving Jake. Eventually, I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to ski resorts and instructors. There were threads discussing the best instructors, but also cautionary tales about those who crossed the line. I found a few posts mentioning Jake by name, detailing experiences where he had made guests uncomfortable. The more I read, the more my resolve strengthened. One post caught my attention. A woman described how Jake had flirted with her while she was with her husband, making suggestive comments and pushing boundaries. She had reported him to the resort, but nothing had been done. It was the same story I had heard from Lisa. Jake was untouchable because of his popularity. I knew I had to act. I started compiling evidence, gathering screenshots of the posts and taking notes on the incidents. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. I thought of Sarah and how she had been swept up in Jake's charm. I couldn't let him continue to hurt others the way he had hurt me. My plan began to take shape. I would approach the resort management with the evidence I had gathered. If they wouldn't listen to the complaints of their guests, maybe they would listen to hard proof of Jake's behavior. I wanted to ensure that he would never have the opportunity to hurt another woman, to manipulate another unsuspecting partner into believing he was something he was not. As I prepared for my meeting with the resort management, I felt a mix of anxiety and determination. I was stepping into a world I had once loved, but now felt tainted by betrayal. I had to fight for my dignity, for my marriage, and for the integrity of the resort that had once been a sanctuary for us. The night before my scheduled meeting, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the last couple of weeks in my mind. My discovery of Sarah's betrayal, my confrontation with her, and now my plan to expose Jake. I was on a mission, and I wouldn't stop until I had achieved my goal. I had to ensure that the ski instructor who had disrupted my life would pay for his actions. When morning finally arrived, I dressed carefully, trying to project an air of confidence. I knew that I was about to challenge the status quo, and I had to be prepared for pushback. As I drove to the resort, I felt a mixture of fear and excitement. I was ready to take control of my life and force change. This was just the beginning. The drive to the resort felt like an eternity. My heart raced as I approached the familiar entrance, the picturesque mountains looming in the background. The Alpine Crest Ski Resort was supposed to be a place of joy and laughter, but now it felt like a battleground. I had a mission, and I was determined to see it through. As I parked, I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I had gathered enough evidence to make a compelling case against Jake, but I knew I had to present it carefully. The resort management would likely be protective of their staff, especially someone as popular as Jake. I needed to tread lightly but firmly. Entering the lodge, I felt the familiar warmth of the place wash over me, but it was tainted by the cold reality of my situation. I made my way to the management office, my stomach churning with anxiety and determination. I had rehearsed what I would say, but now that I was here, the words felt jumbled in my mind. As I knocked on the door, I was greeted by Mark, the resort manager. He was a tall man with a friendly smile, but I knew that beneath that facade lay the complexities of running a business that relied on its staff's charm. "Hey there, what can I help you with today?" he asked, gesturing for me to enter. "Thanks for seeing me, Mark," I said, trying to sound calm. "I wanted to talk about Jake, the ski instructor." His expression shifted slightly, a hint of caution in his eyes. "Oh, what about Jake?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I've heard some concerning things about him, things that I think you should know." Mark leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Look, Jake is a great instructor. He brings in a lot of guests, and we value his contributions. I'm not sure what you've heard, but I'd be cautious about making accusations against him." I felt a surge of frustration at his dismissive tone, but I pressed on. "I'm not here to make unfounded accusations. I have evidence." I pulled out my folder filled with screenshots and notes detailing the complaints I had gathered. "These are reports from guests who have felt uncomfortable with Jake's behavior. He has a pattern of crossing boundaries." Mark's expression hardened as he took the folder from me. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing as he read. "These are serious claims," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "But I need more than just online posts to take action. Look, I understand that Jake is popular, but being liked doesn't give him the right to make women feel uncomfortable," I replied, my voice steady. "I've seen him with my wife and I know what he's capable of. He's charming and he uses that charm to manipulate people." Mark sighed, clearly torn. "I appreciate your concerns, but you have to understand the dynamics here. If we take action against Jake, it could affect the resort's reputation. We have to be careful." I could feel my frustration boiling over. "You're more worried about your reputation than the safety of your guests. If he's allowed to continue this behavior, he will hurt more people. You have a responsibility to protect them." "Calm down," Mark said, raising a hand. "I hear you, but we need to investigate this further before jumping to conclusions. I'll speak with Jake and see if there's any merit to your claims, but I can't promise anything will come of it." "Investigate?" I scoffed. "You need to take immediate action. He shouldn't be allowed on the slopes until this is resolved. You can't let him continue to interact with guests while you're investigating." Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly feeling the pressure. "I'll see what I can do, but I can't make any promises. If you have any more evidence, please bring it to me. We need to handle this delicately." I felt a surge of disappointment but knew I had to keep pushing. "I'll gather more evidence if I need to, but know this, if you don't take action, I will go public with what I know. I won't let this slide." Mark nodded slowly, his expression serious. "I understand your frustration. I'll do my best to address this, but I can't guarantee immediate results." As I left the office, I felt a mix of anger and determination. I knew I had planted the seed of doubt in Mark's mind, but I needed to ensure that it grew into something actionable. I couldn't allow Jake to continue his charm offensive without consequences. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on Jake, watching his interactions with guests and instructors alike. I noticed he was still charming, still engaging, but now there was a sense of urgency in the air. I was determined to ensure he faced the consequences of his actions. I decided to reach out to the women who had shared their experiences online. I wanted to gather more first-hand accounts and potentially form a coalition of voices against Jake. If I could present a united front, it would make it harder for the resort to ignore us. I spent hours online, tracking down the women who had posted about their experiences. I reached out to them, sharing my own story and inviting them to join me in confronting the resort. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Many were eager to share their stories, and some had even encountered similar experiences with Jake. As I compiled their accounts, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my pain anymore. It was about standing up for every woman Jake had manipulated. I was building a case, and I was determined to see it through. The next meeting with Mark couldn't come soon enough. I was ready to present the evidence and ensure that Jake would be held accountable for his actions. The tide was turning, and I was prepared to fight for justice, not just for myself, but for all the women who had been affected by Jake's charm. The day of my next meeting with Mark arrived, and I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I had gathered a substantial amount of evidence, including testimonials from women who had experienced Jake's inappropriate behavior firsthand. I was ready to confront the management of the resort, armed with the voices of those who had felt silenced. As I walked into the lodge, I felt a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about my marriage or my personal betrayal anymore. It was about creating a safer environment for everyone who came to the resort. I was determined to make sure Jake faced the consequences of his actions, and I wouldn't back down. When I entered Mark's office, I found him waiting for me, a serious expression on his face. "Thanks for coming in again," he said, motioning for me to take a seat. "I've had some time to think about our last conversation. I hope you've taken my concerns seriously," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm despite the urgency I felt. I laid out the folder filled with the accounts and testimonials I had gathered. These women deserve to be heard. They've been affected by Jake's behavior, and it's time for the resort to take action. Mark glanced through the documents, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "This is quite a lot of information. I had no idea there were so many complaints against him." "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "This isn't just a few isolated incidents. This is a pattern of behavior that you can't ignore. He's charming, yes, but that charm is masking a darker side that puts your guests at risk." "I understand," Mark said, looking up from the folder. "But you have to realize that taking action against Jake isn't just about the complaints. It could affect the resort's reputation, and there are business implications to consider. Isn't the safety of your guests more important than your reputation?" I challenged, my voice firm. "If you don't take action, you're allowing this to continue. You're enabling him to hurt more people." Mark sighed, clearly torn. "You're right. I can't ignore this. I'll need to speak with Jake and investigate these claims further. But I want to assure you that I take these allegations seriously." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a glimmer of relief. "I just want to ensure that no one else has to go. Through what these women have experienced, we have to hold him accountable." As the meeting concluded, I felt a sense of accomplishment. I had stood up for not just myself, but for all the women who had been affected by Jake's actions. I had taken the first step toward justice, and I hoped it would lead to meaningful change. In the following weeks, I remained vigilant. Mark began investigating the claims, and I kept in touch with the women who had shared their experiences. Word spread through the resort about the complaints against Jake, and I could see the shift in the atmosphere. Staff members started to distance themselves from him, and some even expressed their support for the women who had come forward. Finally, the day came when Mark called me back in for another meeting. "Jake has been suspended pending further investigation," he informed me, his tone serious. "We're taking these allegations seriously, and I want to thank you for bringing them to our attention." I felt a rush of relief wash over me. "Thank you for taking action. This is a step in the right direction." Mark nodded. "We're committed to ensuring that our guests feel safe here. I appreciate your courage in coming forward. It's not easy to speak out against someone who is well-liked." As I left the meeting, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had stood up for what was right, and I had made a difference. While my marriage with Sarah still required healing and rebuilding, I felt empowered knowing that I had taken action against someone who had threatened the safety of others. In the weeks that followed, I continued to work on rebuilding my relationship with Sarah. It wasn't easy, and there were many difficult conversations ahead, but the experience had changed me. I had learned the importance of standing up for myself and others, and I had gained a newfound sense of strength. Looking back, I realized that while the pain of betrayal would always linger, it had also ignited a fire within me, a determination to fight for what was right and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. In the end, I had not only confronted Jake, but I had also confronted my own vulnerabilities. I had learned that love and trust are fragile, but they can also be rebuilt with honesty and effort. I was still on the journey of healing, but I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I had the power to make a difference. As I stood at the edge of the slopes one last time, taking in the breathtaking view, I felt a sense of peace. The mountain stood tall and unyielding, just like my resolve. I had faced the storm, and I was ready to embrace the future. This was a chapter that would shape my life, but it would not define me. I was ready for whatever came next.